Welcome to episode number 11 of the Bridge C14 podcast. Today, Alicia Freeborn sits down with Chelsea Peddle to talk about Chelsea's work as a death doula and educator, as well as her personal experience with supporting others through the MAiD process. In addition, they'll discuss Chelsea's decision to write a book for adults supporting a child and themselves through the process, cover the importance of a person's interpersonal communication skills when supporting someone touched by MAiD, and share some of their personal insights on how to engage in conversation about death, dying, and grief. Thank you, Alicia and Chelsea, for taking the time to share your perspectives with our audience. And to those tuning in, thanks for being here today and for supporting the work of Bridge C14.
Hey, Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you. It's totally my pleasure.
Yeah, so I know you come with really a wealth of experience when we're talking about end-of-life care and, death and grief education and literacy. So we're really happy to have you here on the Bridge C14 podcast.
Thank you. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I know. I think that's what's so cool about having these is that we always have people on that are more than willing to talk about it, and that is not always the case when we think of our society. So I think we collect people who are very much at the forefront and wanting to have these conversations. So it's cool. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So if you can, just to start, if you can introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about, your work as a death doula, an educator, and just as well as your personal experience with supporting someone through the MAiD process.
Sure. Well, my name's Chelsea Peddle, and I have a small values-based business called Circle Space Empowered End-of-Life Planning. So I work here in Victoria, BC, but thanks to the magic of Zoom and this connected world, I've supported families, across the province in Canada and even worldwide, especially in the States. So there's really, I've found since I started my business in 2017, there's really a growing global community around death caring, especially around interests around MAiD. So I started my business supporting people to do more of the pragmatic kind of stuff. I'm definitely that mix of personality where I like getting paperwork done and making sure that your affairs are in order are really important to me. I have like a real systems thinking kind of a brain and approach. So I found that was really helpful in helping people to just think through what their end of life wishes were, or for a time when they were seriously ill, and to help them record some of those values and beliefs and instructions. And through that time, I started noticing that there was a bit of a gap in the way that we prepare for end of life. So lots of folks, or more folks now, I would say, are writing their advanced care planning wishes. So like that idea of like whether or not you would want CPR or other interventions. But one of the things that I found people were really kind of skipping over or not considering was the fact that we all have to live through our end of life. So what's the quality of life that we want during that time? How can we bring emotional and physical and spiritual comfort to ourselves and our loved ones as we're going through this really tumultuous time? And so after helping several families and helping my mom, which I'll talk about in a second, I created a resource called My Personal Comfort Plan. And it's basically a guidebook and a checklist to help people think through those kinds of things, like how do I want to live during this time? How can I bring myself comfort? And there's 7 pillars, and it goes through tips and tricks and ideas around your physical comfort, how to adapt your environment, because a lot of us, we go between our home or some form of assisted living, possibly into the ER and the hospital. We have to adapt to these changing environments and still find and bring comfort with us through that. So this book has been, I've been so heartened to see how helpful it's been for the families that I serve as a doula. It basically allows people to write down their instructions so that their loved ones can come when they're feeling like really untethered. Like a lot of the time, our family caregivers, they want to help so badly, but they don't know how. So having these instructions is a really lovely way for people who are coming in and visiting or caring for someone who is ill or dying to know what to do, how they can help. So that was a really big part of my business for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom got sick.
I just want to say too, as someone who has an elderly aunt and who I am their next of kin, and I hold the like the paperwork for, you know, the do not resuscitate. I feel like just hearing about that would be something that I should do. I should have those conversations with her so that I fully understand what her wishes are, aside from just do not resuscitate, because there's all these other things, right? Like there's that practical piece, but I think, as you say, let's like, what are the values? What is the end of life comfort that you're really searching for and would want? Because that would be so helpful for me to understand. So that's so cool to hear. Is that booklet, is that for sale outside of your death doula services, or is that kind of part of included in the services piece?
Yeah, so it's available for purchase on my website. Here's what it looks like. It's like this really sweet and portable little booklet. It's like spiral bound. It's really easy to like pack in your hospital bag or to just have out on the kitchen table for when people come to visit. So like certainly all of my doula clients, we use this when we're doing some of that advanced planning. And then their family members can refer to it throughout that process. But it's available for purchase on my website. There's this printed booklet version and then also an ebook version. So it's really easy to create on your own.
That's excellent. Oh my gosh. Well, we'll make sure that we will put your contact information in your website just below on the blog or on the podcast page when we're posting this, in case anyone does, you know, is interested, as I am anyways, to review that and just get some ideas on how to have those conversations, because I'm totally at that point with her now. So that's so helpful. So,
well, I find that, you know, so many of us, we haven't really spent the time, because of maybe the culture that we're in, really contemplating what conscious living and dying looks like. And what I've heard from folks who have used this book is that that's what this helps them do. It helps them be really mindful about how they're approaching this phase of their living and dying, and how to really wrap that care and support and that love and those relationships around them during this time.
Yeah. Oh, it makes total sense. And yeah, even just saying the word mindful, right? Like, I think, you know, it does bring me back to that idea of like really thinking it through, and like, what does that mean to consciously, I guess, plan your death? Because that's not something that is familiar, I think, a familiar concept that we, you know, generally think about. We're not taught about it in school. So I think it's something that we can really do for ourselves and for our loved ones from like a self-care perspective, to just be like, I have this in place. I've thought about it. I've written it down. I have that intention there. So at least, I mean, things can go so sideways. I know when we're talking about illnesses and dying, but at least if it's written down, someone like me who's that next of kin support person, I can at least do my best to try and advocate for what she wanted. So
absolutely,
that's super helpful. Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, I was cutting you off right when you were telling me about your experience with your mother, supporting your mother. Yeah. So I'd like to give you the floor now to kind of share a little bit more about that.
Thank you. You know, it's so amazing how like our personal lives and our professional lives in this field, just they really dovetail sometimes. And so I'd started working as an end-of-life planner in around 2017. And then in 2019, my mom was diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor, which is a really aggressive and terminal brain tumor. And like to this day, I'm so thankful that I was already immersed in this death caring field. To, you know, we'd had those conversations. I knew what my mom's wishes were. I knew what her values were. And that just eased the path so much, because it was 3 months to the day from her diagnosis to her medically assisted death. So it was extremely fast. It just feels like, breakneck speed. So having had those conversations before you get into crisis it just served us so well. And so from the moment she got her diagnosis, we'd already talked about, how she felt about MAiD and what she wanted her end of life to be like. So, and she was a very curious person. So from the moment she had her diagnosis, she knew that she wanted to talk to a MAiD assessor. She wanted to talk with someone about what all of her options were, just that she could have everything in her back pocket. And so that was one of the first conversations that we had. We had a really phenomenal MAiD assessor, a physician, come and meet us in our home and spent probably over an hour with us and another family member answering all of our questions, tending to all of our concerns and our fears, and walking us through that paperwork. So we were very fortunate. I'm in Victoria as well. And so Victoria and BC is, in Canada, the area of the country where the most MAiDs take place. So there's a lot of resources and support. And we definitely saw that here through my mom's experience. But it's funny, even having practiced as an end-of-life planner and as a death doula, I hadn't had any personal experience with MAiD until my mom got sick. So that was really the first time that I started to kind of pivot all of the skills and the experience that I had around supporting folks through preparing for natural death into this kind of very regimented process with this clear timeline. And one of the things that I struggled with the most was engaging my children in that process.
Right. That makes total sense. And, just curious, before we talk a little bit more about that, and the book that you've put together for them, what were you most surprised at, would you say, coming from that professional side, of supporting people and planning for their deaths, to then being like that caregiver, that next of kin, supporting your mom who's now decided how this is going to go and that it's going to be very much planned, like having that date and that time, knowing how many days were left. What were you most surprised by?
It's so different when you're living it, right? Like anyone who's been a family caregiver knows the relentlessness of that period of time and the number of roles that you take on, especially if the person you're caring for requires that 24-hour care. So becoming a scheduler, coordinating friends, sitting with her, coordinating home care, getting her to lab tests, deciding when to stop doing that, like as our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so not only tending to my mom and kind of helping her to navigate all of the different hoops that we need to go through with the different silos really that we experience. So like the cancer clinic and how do you operate there? And then the MAiD process, how do you learn about that? So suddenly having to be so literate in all of these different systems while wanting to have that quality connection and time with my mom and the family.
Yeah, I hear you. And like, I think you have to be so organized, so on top of things, and yet you're under such emotional duress. I think that was my real surprise as someone who lived through it, where just the expectation of, like you said, there were so many hoops and not, I don't even know if hoops is the right word, but there's just so many things that you have to coordinate, that you have to be almost like an administrative assistant to your loved one, because there's tracking the medication, there's tracking the appointments, and then also that gatekeeping piece, right? Where it's like knowing it's like, okay, you've already had one social call today. Can you manage a second? But if you don't do the second, when's that second one going to happen when we only have so many days left? And it's just, I would say from just reflecting back on that, I gotta say, I think did a pretty good job, all things considered. And I think most people do. They're so hard on themselves during it. But I think, and sometimes afterwards too, but I think just, reflecting that back, that it's like we're living through such a difficult time that we really do our best. And I think we have to remind ourselves of that and be kind to ourselves, because nobody's going to be perfect. Mistakes are going to be made, but we do our best, right?
That's it. And this is where doulas come in. This is where I see the relief, like when I support families, or I view other doulas supporting families during this time, because just to have someone to walk with you and to help point out, well, maybe try this, or, have you thought of this, or approaching the conversation this way, navigating to different resources, helping you to organize all of your duties. And then what I find actually in most of my doula work, I primarily support the family caregiver more even than the person who's dying. Often the person who is dying, they're actually okay with what's going on. It's the people around them that really need that steady presence and guidance to just help them through that storm. And that's really where I wish that, doulas were available to every family going through this. Like, you get a serious or a terminal diagnosis, or you're admitted to, hospice or home hospice or palliative care, here's your doula. Like, I just think it has such clear benefit.
I almost think of it as, and please don't take offense, but like, how we have emotional support dogs, where it's like, this is your emotional support person during such a difficult time. Because I really think it's like, it's one of the hardest things we go through in our lives, is supporting someone we love to die. And I think it's just the emotions are so difficult to kind of live through. And then, like you said, there's just so many things on top of that we have to be responsible for. And just having, I think, a support person to be like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Just to be able to talk it through and have someone be available at the drop of a dime for a phone call, for a text. We can't put that on other loved ones as much as we'd like to, I think. So, and that saves them from, we all have our little eccentric things that come out at the end, because we're so stressed that, it's hard to be diplomatic. It's hard to be tactful when your emotions are so high. And I think that's part of it. Anyways, sorry, I know that was a little bit of a tangent we went on, but I liked it, and I think it's a good conversation.
It's worthwhile.
Absolutely. So you were talking about how the difficulty of kind of learning how to talk to your kids about this. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about the book that you've written, and just talk about why you decided to write it, and I guess just expanding a little bit more on that.
Sure, yeah. So when my mom was diagnosed, my children were, it was right around their birthdays. So they were just turning 4 and 7. So they're really wee ones at the time. And we'd had lots of conversations about natural death. Like, we'd had, bug funerals and talk about cycles of life. Like, their mom's a death doula. So my kids, the natural part of death and cycle of life, they kind of had down. So, which was really helpful, because it wasn't like we were approaching that conversation for the first time when my mom got sick. But the challenge with, I suppose I should explain, when my mom received the terminal diagnosis, we made sure to share information with my kids at the same pace that we were getting it as a family, because that idea of really being a team unit and being transparent at an age appropriate level with kids, we found to be so important, because kids know, they sense what's going on, and maintaining that trust is, if you're going to do anything with kids, it's maintaining that trust, and that sense of teamwork is kind of like your number one thing. So, we explained to them that their Nana was dying, and what that meant for her body, and what would happen when she dies, so that we had a really strong foundation of fact, like the biology of death and illness. Where I stumbled was the MAiD part. So, how do you explain that this is, a choice that that their Nana was making, and how do I explain that in a way that doesn't scare them or damage them, when I'm in this big emotional turmoil myself, trying to figure all that out myself. And so at the time, there were virtually no resources to support those conversations. MAiD is relatively still new in Canada for adults wrapping our heads around it, let alone the recognition that there are children that are involved in these families and their persons using MAiD. So no library books, nothing, like I would normally go and get to read a book with them. Fortunately, I found the pediatric counselor at the hospice had some really great advice about how to present it to them using very fact-based information. So I kind of muddled through and decided to tell my older child, the 7-year-old. But at the time, I decided not to tell the 4-year-old because I just couldn't get my head around. I don't know why. I felt at the time like she was just too young. I couldn't go there. It was like I'd reached my max. And so we had this conversation with my older daughter and involved her in visiting her Nana's body after she died, and lots of other kinds of rituals. But about 3 months after my mom's death, this story just kind of flowed through me with this recognition that I really wanted to create a resource or a book that I needed as a parent. I wanted to create that piece that I wish that I had had. And so I wrote this story in a picture book format that kind of lays out like, well, what does that conversation look like? We're told to use age appropriate language, but what does that actually mean? We're told to tend to our children's need for connection and relationship, but what does that look like? So I wrote this story to actually show like what that whole process could look like in a family. And it's meant to be, like a book that parents would read first, because I feel like, we're missing a lot of that information ourselves. We need information at that level because that's what our brains can process during this time of grief anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because I feel thankful that I've had a chance to see the book, see your draft. And I got to say, I think, we're trying at that point, like you're just trying to make sense of so much information at once that I think distilling it down into a kid's book is actually quite helpful for the adults, because you're like, it's so hard to explain, but it's like you're in such emotional turmoil that's I think the level that we need, almost like that comforting, even the language, right? Because we're dealing with so many other really large terms when it comes to like medication, and so having it where it's just like, yeah, pretty straightforward, let's explain this to you. I think that for me that would have been incredibly helpful. So I love that. And even the pictures, right? Because I think for myself anyways, with artwork, it can be so calming. It can allow you to look at something while you process what you just read. And I think those two things would go so well together. So I'm super excited to see once that artwork is ready and you kind of
I can't wait to. It's so exciting. I'm in that process right now, starting to work with find an illustrator and make those beautiful images, because I think when we're supporting our loved ones through MAiD as adults, especially if it's a parent or a grandparent, someone who, cared for us, we revert to being a child, in our emotions, right? Because it's a really profound thing to suddenly be caring for the person who cared for us. And so, like you said, having a picture book, like we all know, like, the Robert Munch classic, that one, I'll Love You Forever, like just how even like grown-ups, it just gets you. And I think it's because when we're in that emotional space, we need that same nurturing as children do. And there's something about these picture books that offer that type of support to adults as well. And that's what I really wanted. I really wanted another way to care for families that are going through this.
Yeah. And, I've often heard, because I run, support groups on the regular, and one of the first things that I hear people saying that they've lost is their ability to read, and like novels, like long-term forms. And I think I had that myself. It took me a while to recognize that. Being a lifelong reader, I had to really realize that I just was not, my attention span could not hold these long stories. I just could not go there. So I think, again, having a picture book available, that's about the length of, attention span. I think that people that are kind of in that stage of supporting a loved one and then the grief that follows, that's about right. So I think it's a good design, and I really look forward, like I said, to see as it comes together over the next year, and once it's ready for publication and wide availability. Maybe we'll have you back on.
I'd love to. I'll share it. It's so exciting.
Maybe you can read it on the podcast.
I would love to. It's story time.
Yeah. Aww,
yeah. I think
awesome.
it's, to my knowledge, I think it's the first book about, specifically about medical assistance in dying for children and families. And my hope is that there's many, many more that come after this, and it just becomes normalized as another story supporting children's grief.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully as the MAiD provision or delivery also becomes more widely known, and I would say it's widely available, but I think a lot of people don't totally know about it yet, or are still, kind of on the fence of whether they'd like to use it. But, hopefully we see a cultural shift where this is becoming, a better option for people to choose. We can hope anyways.
Yeah, I think it's getting there, honestly, with all of the work, that Bridge C14 and others are doing. I think it's getting there.
Yeah, and that's certainly, we're trying. I think something like this, though, having a book in a library that maybe people will come across, or they'll have it in, have it on to read recommended pile, something like that just kind of gets the word out, even outside of just the organizations that so support it. We need there to be other conversations in the community happening about it, I think, for it to really become, well known and accepted. So we'll get there, but this is definitely, this will help. So yeah. Talking about communication, and being able to communicate some of these really difficult things, I wanted to ask you, one of the things we always think about is how meaning can be different for different people. So the meaning of certain terms. And so what would you say, like, how important is a person's, interpersonal communication skills to really support a dialogue, to establish that meaning, and to really understand someone and seeing where they're coming from with their experience with MAiD? And I ask you that specifically because I know that's come up in some of our group meetings, where it's like, a lot of times we'll say grief journey, and another person will be like, I hate that word journey. And it's like, so really trying to, how have you approached that, being a death doula and death educator?
It can feel like a minefield sometimes, right? Like knowing what to say and what not to say. And I always laugh at, like, on Instagram or Facebook, there's posts about, what never to say to someone who is grieving. And then there's another list right next to it that says what you should say to someone who's grieving. And they're the same things. Yeah. So I think it's, it all comes down to relationship to me. Like, we can't, you said earlier, like, we're human. We're not going to do this perfectly. We're going to make mistakes. We're not mind readers. And especially when you throw all of the tension and navigating a new world, new systems on top of that. But it's about relationship. It's about engaging with compassion and curiosity. And, as professionals, we, like the amount of ritual that I do to create a container for myself when I'm engaging with folks, where I can just kind of be a vessel for support. So where I take, my ego, my agenda out of it, and really just get good at listening and being present. like that's the key for me. Early in my practice, I would look at those lists, what to say, what not to say. And, thinking that, oh, I had this down. I remember, there's a big thing right now about like not offering, like don't offer to just like help out, like pick up a meal and drop it off at someone's place. And I remember doing that for one of my earlier clients. And she didn't like that. She didn't want to have, it felt like it was, I don't know, some kind of a statement about how she needed help. And that was stuff that she was dealing with. And so I thought I was doing something that, was, gold star, seal of approval. It was gonna be helpful.
Yeah.
And so, we make mistakes, and the key is, how do we come back from that? How do we listen? How do we engage? So I think being gentle with ourselves and those expectations is the most important part.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, we know we're going to make mistakes, and sometimes it's okay to admit maybe when we've done it or when we don't know the answer to something, and just saying, that's a really good question. I have to think of that, or I'll do a little bit of research and come back to you on that when we are trying to support someone and we just don't have the right answer in that moment. And speaking of meaning, I know you've said the term ritual a few times, and I was just wondering if you could expand on that. What does ritual mean to you, to some of your clients, and could you offer some examples?
Yeah, that's such a great example of like how people interpret things differently, and how it can be offensive to some people and or scary. So for me, like I come at it from like a secular, nature-based approach, and ritual really just means intention and mindfulness to me. Just means doing even the smallest things with presence. So like in my personal comfort plan, we talk about ritual. So it can be as simple as, let's say you're going to visit a person in hospice or in a long-term care facility, and now we wash our hands all the time, right? We come in, this is part of what we do. Yeah. So instead of just brushing it off as something that needs to be done, it's a moment to really ground your breathing, feel your feet on the floor, notice the sensation of the water. Imagine what it is that you're cleansing away. Like, what do you want to be present for when you're in this visit? What do you need to leave? What do you need to wash away in order to be present? And just take that moment to make this simple act of washing your hands a ritual. So like, so simple. And then there's also big elaborate things.
Yeah, no, I actually love that though. I've been trying to be and practice mindfulness, and I find it terribly difficult at times. But I think, just having that where that's something you're going to do every time. You're going to take that moment, go to the washroom, right? Wash your hands, and just, and I think water, it's funny, but water, they say a lot because of the electrolytes and stuff, and the, our connection with it, that you're having this sensation of the water running over you, and just taking that moment to really feel it, and just like you said, let it ground you. Maybe leave the stressing of just trying to find a parking spot, or hitting a big snowbank while you were trying to park, which has been happening here in Toronto a lot, let me tell you. I think I really love that. So that's such a good example of ritual. So thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. And since we were talking about mindfulness, I had this quote that I really liked, that I was going to share. And it says, this is more specific to when we're attending to someone, and listening to what they have to say. So it goes, when we listen mindfully, we tune in fully to another person and try to understand what that person is communicating without imposing our own ideas, judgments, or feelings. Mindfulness starts with the decision to attend fully to another. Physically, this is signified by paying attention, adopting involved posture, keeping eye contact, and indicating interest in what the other person says. These behaviors are called attending, which I think a lot of us know, but I think that word attending is new for me anyways. Mindfulness is the first step in effective listening, and it is the foundation for all other parts of the process. Because mindful listening involves taking the perspective of another, it fosters dual perspective. So the reason I wanted to bring that in is because that dual perspective idea and how mindfulness and really attending to what the person is saying has been something I think I've been trying to be better at, not just in my my peer support work as a volunteer here at Bridge C14, but also just in my life. I feel like that's a skill that I've had to learn now in my 30s to really, and what tending means. And I just wanted to just check with you on that to see, like, has there been anything that you've really noticed, being a death doula, being a death educator, that really, I guess your own experience, does that speak to you and what your experience has been? And
so much, yeah. And that I love that, attending to, that's a fabulous concept, because it's funny, that just kind of put words to what it is that I try to help the people that I serve do. I talk about it as being present or presencing, because in this storm, if you can find those moments of connection, even if they're brief, it's that whole idea of like quality over quantity, because it can be hard when you're doing all of these other things, all the other tasks you have to do. But if you can get a few moments in the day where you're really tuning into your loved one and the people around you, that's what fills your bucket. And that's what you're going to remember, that feeling, once the person has died, once you're looking back on, that's the stuff that's really going to tether you to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always say something in our groups too, where it's like, we're here to witness. So we're witnessing each other's grief. And simply by doing that, it's allowing that person not feel so alone with those really difficult feelings. And I have to say, I think that would apply to witnessing someone who's also that, it's like they're almost grieving their life right before. It's like that anticipatory grief of the person who has chosen a date. And it's like we're witnessing their decision and all the feelings around that. But you did say something that was something that I experienced as well, where it's like the person who's dying is more at peace sometimes than the people around them. And that was my experience as well. My mother, once she made that decision, it was smooth sailing. Like, of course, there was still things to do with pain and medication, but never did she waver on that decision. Like, it was more like counting down to when she finally could have made. And I think that was amazing from being able to witness that. I was just wondering, was that your experience with your mom as well?
Yeah, I think, I've never, in that time, I've often tried to describe like what the magic was that happened in those 3 months, because they were incredibly difficult, but they were also like the most alive and connected I have ever felt with my mom, with my family, my kids, my sister. And it certainly helped that my mom was so calm and confident in what was right for her. Yeah. She didn't have a lot of that she didn't really have any of that inner conflict, because it was a lifetime of work, getting to know herself, that brought her to that. Like, her death really was a reflection of her life. And I have a colleague who often says, for the person who is dying, they have to be right with it so that the people around them can be right with it. It makes just such an incredible difference when that's the case. And this is where, as a doula, and then also what I've seen in my personal life, when we're supporting folks who are having MAiD, approaching the time leading up to it, the delivery itself, and then the time after, approaching that as ceremony or as ritual or with intention. It's such an incredible opportunity to tend to everybody's grief in such a wise way. It doesn't mean that it's any less hard, but the really complicated stuff is often softened because there's some meaning to it and some structure to it. So I often engage people who are planning for MAiD in an end of life visualization, and sometimes we'll do it just the two of us. Other times their chosen people will be with them, and I ask a series of questions, and then to imagine what the days leading up to what the event itself will be like, and to hear like different perspectives on what everyone wants for themselves and each other during that time is really fabulous, because then we can create a picture that works for as many people as possible and then draw in other support. So if something isn't possible for one person, well, where do we source that elsewhere? How do we find that so that nobody's kind of left, flailing about out in the cold? And it really helps to ground people when they're moving towards that countdown, that parade of lasts over the last few weeks and days, to have that structure and support.
Yeah, and I think that such a good point about being able to actually visualize the day and when it happens. I think myself and my brother and my aunt and my mom, the one who chose it, we would have so benefited from that, because literally the day of, we're like literally walking into the bedroom, and it's like, so I guess I'll sit on the bed beside you, I guess I'll stand at the end. And like, had we visualized that, it wouldn't have been so clunky at the end. And that's kind of how it felt. We were all a little bit of bumbling fools, because obviously we're upset, we don't know what we're doing. So I think having that would have been, my mom was cool as a cucumber, it's fine. It was the rest of us that felt like, like a cartoon of bumbling idiots around her trying to figure it out. So I feel like that would have been hugely beneficial. So I love that. And I hope, hopefully the point of these podcasts is to share important experiences like that, and such, I would say, wise wisdom from someone who has supported many others in their end of life plans. So that's awesome. I feel like that's such a rich observation to share. So thank you. Just a few questions left. So the next one was, and that was one of them right there, but any other, personal insights that you'd like to share, whether it's to parents supporting a loved one, or just a family member, or supporting children through the MAiD journey? Any other wise wisdom to kind of pass along?
I think, speaking to parents with younger children, really encouraging you to think about how you want to include your children. And we have such a block in many cultures around protecting our kids, the idea that excluding them is the way to protect them. And it's really hard to move past that, especially in this, when we're inviting them into one of life's most vulnerable and unpredictable moments. And so it doesn't, necessarily mean that they need to be present at the MAiD delivery, although that has certainly happened and can be, really healthy and positive experience. But just finding ways to inform them of what's going on, listen to what they need, and then find other ways to support them during that time, like during the delivery. So whether it's that they're, a special aunt or uncle is taking them to their favorite beach where they used to spend time with their person who is dying, and so they build a sandcastle or something as a way to remember them. With in my book, with pancakes for Nana, Sam, the little kid, makes pancakes. They learn how to make pancakes on their own as kind of a way to honor their Nana. So just find some way to connect them and have them be a part of the experience.
Yeah, and I think that's also tying back to ritual, right? Where now they can ritually make pancakes, or maybe they annually, it's a ritual to go to that beach and make the sandcastles, just to remember that day and remember, the loved one. I really love that. And I think
I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I just had a little memory, this flash of with my kids. So the pancakes with Nana came from the fact that every Sunday we would go to my mom's house and she would make us pancakes. And so I remember, thinking how sad it was going to be once she died. Like, who is going to make us pancakes? We're not going to go to her house anymore. What is that first Sunday going to be like? And I talked with my kids about it a little bit, trying to create new traditions, but I didn't set anything up. And I woke up that Sunday morning and I heard my kids kind of scurrying around in the house, like whispering, and I could tell they were doing something. And so I thought, okay, I'll stay in bed for a little bit longer. So 30 minutes go by and they come in and get me and take me into the living room, and they'd set up on the coffee table flowers and plates and beautiful napkins and syrup. And they didn't know how to make pancakes themselves because they were too little, but they'd set everything else up, and they'd set a place for my mom as well. Like, when we give kids a chance to be included, it is incredible the wisdom that they can bring.
Yeah, and the consideration.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And now, right, they'll be able to learn how to make pancakes. So the next time
they do now.
There'll be we had something a little bit similar with my niece and nephew, so my brother's kids, and they love to always at my mom's house, they used to always love having tea parties. She'd gotten like a little tea set for them, and we'd constantly have tea parties every time they were down. And so that's what we did. That was their goodbye with her, pretty much, was they hosted a tea party. And same thing, they set it up. They chose the napkins, and they set it up. And then since then, it's been a little bit difficult because of the pandemic, but every time we go, at least me and my aunt, we've had tea parties with them. And there's this special mug that was hers that they had given her, best grandma ever. And they always put it out like as a place for her, so that she's still joining the tea party. And, I never thought of it as ritual, but that's absolutely what it is.
That's ritual
that we've created for ourselves. And that obviously brings comfort, acknowledges, her and acknowledges her as part of that ritual still. And I just having this realization, that's so cool.
That's it. You're doing it. We do it so much in our lives. We do it anytime we seek that ongoing connection and do things mindfully. That's it. Ritual. We're already doing it.
And I think it's just understanding how that term applies and how it can apply, because I also come from a background of atheism. I found more spirituality, surprisingly, after losing my mom, but I always kind of associated ritual with religion, and I don't know why. And I think just kind of understanding that it doesn't have to be, and it can be our own thing, and we can apply it to many different facets of our life. Sorry, I always get that one screwed up, but I think that's so interesting, and I love that. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I think I had one more question, but you know what? You've really answered it. It was really just any advice for individuals wanting to explore having these conversations. And I think we've had that throughout the discussion, especially with that guide kind of that you showed at the beginning, and that we'll make sure that we include at the bottom. So any last things that you'd like to add for any of the routine people that might be watching this?
Well, I think, that question about how do you start this conversation, I think, seeking out information together is so great. Like attending one of the Bridge C14 drop-in meetings to just start, like my mom did, just gather that information, like ask your person to come with you, look at the health authority websites together. And if you are, a family caregiver or a loved one of someone who is seriously ill or dying, like you'd said earlier, the challenge is a lot of people don't know that this is an option. And we're still in a place in Canada where a lot of our physicians and specialists and medical care providers, they're not yet bringing this up as a viable option. And so we are often responsible for kind of doing that that homework and advocating for ourselves. So as a loved one, if you're aware of MAiD, I think I do encourage people to talk about it, and it is a sensitive conversation, but what I like to say is, try saying something like, there's many options for your care and for your comfort and to improve your quality of life, and also lots of options for your end of life care when that time comes, like hospice, like palliative care, like medical assistance in dying. And then asking them, like, are you interested in learning about any more of these, or what do you already know about MAiD and hospice and palliative care? And just kind of normalizing it is what's key, and approaching it with that curiosity and that compassion.
Absolutely. And I can just say, from something I learned from my own experience supporting my mom, was that she and me incorrectly assumed that hospice meant you had to go into hospice. It was a building where people went to die and received palliative care. And we didn't realize afterwards where hospice means so much more than that. There's so much more that can be offered for home care. So their mandate goes far beyond just helping people that actually are in hospice. It's people who are also, if they're living with a life-limiting or terminal illness at home, there's support people out there to come and help them and to kind of guide them through some of this stuff too. Like, the supports are out there. And so I think, just knowing that people, like, you don't have to do it alone. There are people out there to really, you can contact, and, outside of the hospice, Bridge C14, death doulas, there are people there, and it's just finding and getting connected with the right people to kind of just help it along. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Create your circle of care. Yeah.
Exactly. Circle of care. That's another great term that I learned about after.
Yes, I know. This is the thing. And it's wonderful that you're sharing that learning. This is what we do. This is what Bridge C14 is all about, is sharing that learning that we've gone through, and helping other people to learn those lessons sooner and to find that information sooner. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely community. Learning how important community is for this is huge. So well, thank you again, Chelsea. It was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for making yourself available. And like I said, we really look forward to your book coming out, Pancakes with Nana, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to have you back on to read it. But that'd be so cool, right? I just made that up.
That'd be very cool.
Hopefully my supervisor agrees.
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.